What gives you this sense of optimism when so many people right now are saying we're not going to get fundamental tax reform?
Well, fundamentally, David, what's going on here is Congress has a couple of hoops to jump through. And there's really two things at work here. One is that CEOs are distancing themselves from the president, of course, but they're not going to stop advocating for tax reform. So there's going to be a lot of push behind tax reform. And second, this is fundamentally a thing that Congress has to do. Congress feels that they got elected in spite of the president, I think. They outperformed him largely in the 2016 elections. And they think they got elected to do economic growth. They think they got elected to do tax reform, and especially with the failure of the Affordable Care Act and the turmoil in the current White House, they really feel more than ever that they've got to get something done.
So tax reform is something that almost everyone can sign up for. Democrat, Republican, left, right, everyone believes in tax reform. Then you get down to the details. And it probably isn't a coincidence. It's been 31 years since we had fundamental tax reform. And that was when Ronald Reagan was president. He had a pretty crackerjack team in place. He'd been in office for several years. And by the way, the Democrats helped him a lot. Those things don't seem to be present this time.
They don't seem to be present this time, but where we've been and where I think this is going is that you really don't get tax reform, which a lot of folks, including former Treasury Secretary Summers, will talk about as a real fundamental restructuring of the tax code. What you're likely to get here is major slashes in the corporate rate and changes to the individual rate, and probably on a temporary basis.
Okay, so this is important. How we describe these things matters, because I think what Larry was talking about was fundamental tax reform, where we really broaden the basis, they say, eliminate a lot of deductions, really adjust things the way it was done back in '86, right? So now you're saying, no, we'll get some tax cuts is what we'll get, and temporary, and that's because they won't be deficit neutral?
We've never thought they would be deficit neutral. I mean, we think there'll be a little bit of base broadening in here as well, but we've never thought it would end up being deficit neutral. Our call for some time has been that what you're likely to see here is an increase in the deficit equivalent to 1% of gross domestic product.
It's interesting as you describe the reasons why we're likely to get some form of tax relief, at least, if not fundamental reform. You mentioned the Congress, you mentioned the business community. You didn't talk much about the White House. And even as today, there are rumors circulating about Gary Cohn, there are rumors circulating about Steve Mnuchin and things. Are they important to this process at this point, or basically do you think it's going to get done almost despite the White House?
No, well, they're important to the process. The way I described it to investors last night is Congress needs a competent partner in the White House. And as long as Mr. Cohn and Mr. Mnuchin are still there and still providing that, they have a competent partner. Fundamentally, the way Congress will look at something is they need the president to sign a bill. And as long as they're going all basically in the same direction, that's probably what you get.